The purpose of today's session is to support tech startups and scale-ups to learn how to secure pilots, partners, or contracts with larger organizations in the public and private sectors. It will cover the approaches, challenges, and tips to make a success of this while providing useful insights to larger organizations looking to engage with smaller ones from our experienced panelists. I'm going to start off by just introducing myself, and then I'll go around the panel and everybody can just give a quick overview of who they are and what they do. So my name is James Milligan. I'm the Global Head of Technology, or Hays Technology. I've got quite a lot of experience working with seed and Series A organizations in terms of pilots and MVPs, and actually, sort of moving into full-scale deployment across the business. So hopefully I'll be able to share some of my insights. If I go around the room then, Gaeta, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, Gaeta Manla. I'm working with Siemens. Now we are called Unix. We are based in Poole, and we deal with traffic. Traffic's on the road, and I'm innovation lead engineer. So I'm looking for any innovation and new ideas in terms of technology, hardware, or it could be a service, software, and I'm looking at it from a technical point of view, assessing it, and then evaluate it. And if it makes sense to the business, I will introduce it to the rest of the business.
Okay, that's great. Thanks a million. Chris.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Chris Mckee. I'm a Business Development and Innovation Manager at the Leeds Teaching Hospital Trust. So I'm coming from the public sector side here. So my role really is to work with innovators, typically in the healthcare sector or connected to that, in order to link them up to our clinical and academic community that we have here. We do have a range of experience, I think, that we can bring to the table here for securing pilots and contracts within the NHS, within our particular arm of the NHS in acute care, which I think would be very valuable to many people in this discussion.
All right, thank you very much, Chris. Richard.
Hi, good morning. So Richard Whitehouse, Director of Digital at Mitchells & Butlers. We're a large operator of pubs and restaurants in the UK, 17 core brands, and the largest listed pub code in the country. We run sort of a startup incubator program, very keen to sort of look at technology which can fast track our sort of e-commerce objectives.
Thank you, Richard. And Jimmy.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I am a business strategy manager within Microsoft. I look after a number of things across our UK business. Oh, I've got a nasty echo. Can you hear me okay?
I've muted. If everybody else can mute, just in case it's one of us that's causing that when we're not speaking, that would be great.
Thanks. So yes, I look at strategy across our UK business. I focus on growth and go-to-market, really. So I focused on lots of different areas like growing our artificial intelligence market and business, sustainability as well. But I also do a lot of work around skilling and social impact. And one of the things I do every year is I run a startup accelerator, where we take 15 companies through a 6-month program of work, and we teach them around social impact, we teach them around technology, and we're running one this year called AI for Sustainability, where we'll be going through that, and that's in partnership with the Met Office as well. So a lot of my time is spent looking at how we work with the startup ecosystem and how we help onboard them into our organisation and help them grow.
That's great, Jimmy. And finally, last but not least, James.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So I'm CTO at a data and technology company called Red Flag Alert, which is basically a twofold purpose. It's around sales enablement and risk management. Prior to that, I've spent about 20 years as an entrepreneur, and in the last 5 years moved into the corporate world in financial services. So I think I've got a kind of curious kind of perception of the world, latterly getting into the corporate world from entrepreneurialism, and suffered with a bit of PTSD, if I've got to be honest. But I think it'll be an interesting debate today on how the two maybe work together. Again, in my 20 years of entrepreneurialism, it was working in a startup that I had, working with a $4 billion enterprise software company. So that kind of David and Goliath kind of relationship.
So both sides of the table, James, that you'll be able to share.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's get into it because we've got limited time and quite a lot to run through. I'm going to start off by putting this question to Gaeta, if that's okay. To what extent do you think startups and scale-ups can successfully work with large organizations in the public and private sector? And if you like, do you have any sort of case studies of successful interactions?
Yeah, I think the opportunity is there. There's lots of benefits for big companies to work with startups. One of them is actually the flexibility of the startups. Startups are more focused on specific areas because they usually either spin out from university or they split from a bigger organization. So they are more focused. They understand the market clearly. They understand their competitors. They're going through lots of support and help, whether from government or other organizations, so they know what they want. Working together, they provide the flexibility, the expertise maybe the bigger company might not have. Bigger company, usually we suffer from rigidity and we have to follow processes, laws, other things that sometimes stop us from evolving or developing or taking an idea into the market fast enough. So there's a huge benefit from working together. The only thing that I can see might be a challenge from working together is having different culture, for example. Are we suitable to work with each other? Do we have the same aim? Are we seeking like the same output, for example? It's good to have clarity before big companies working with other smaller companies. I think the best way to approach it is to have maybe some funding to start with. If there's a funding that bring these two companies together, so they can work together, they can see if they are a good fit with each other. I think it would be a good start. We did work with other small companies. I think one of the companies we work with is a company that they sell cameras. We came from traffic. We monitor traffic. We need to understand the congestion. We have our controller that controls traffic lights, and we work on phases. It depends on congestion, if you've got cars on the road or not. So we work with a company. They sell cameras. And it was successful. They applied for a bid that we support them, and they won £3 million. And now they are going global or national within the UK. So yeah, we do have success story that we worked with other companies. We are active. We're always seeking to work with a smaller company that they have solution they can add values to our products.
Thank you, Gaita. Chris, do you have anything to sort of add from a public sector lens?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, our experiences can be sometimes similar and sometimes dissimilar to those of large organizations in the private sector. I guess the big thing is with the NHS side of things. The NHS is huge. It's a massive brand. It's the largest publicly funded healthcare system in the world. And I think for small companies and large ones, really, they kind of have the same problem of not really knowing where to go. They think of the NHS, they try and hit it probably even from sort of a high level, and they tend to just get drowned out by all the noise. But my experience has been for startups, for example, I find that actually they can make that process a lot easier, and we can make that process a lot easier. But in order to do that, it would be around actually knowing: are you addressing an unmet need in the system? Are you coming to the market with a solution to an existing problem that is within the NHS? And some people don't know the answer to that question. So it's always good to talk to people and find out if there's a market there for you already. Now, when they know that, then it's also finding the right organizations that could work for you. So I mean, I work in Leeds, but there's multiple opportunities here around the country. Certain organizations are better structured for supporting innovators and for innovation. So you want to go to those trusts, those parts of the NHS that have the team who can enable you, rather than just going randomly to different groups. So in our case, it would be talking to someone like me, or someone in a similar situation in more of an innovation type role, who can help bring you to the key stakeholders, see if there's an opportunity for you there. If there is clinical support to do so, and this could be anything from the estates all the way up to high-level neurosurgery, if there is support within the ecosystem to do it, they like the solution on offer. It can often be a relatively straight line after that point. That's kind of our go, no go, and that's the same for pretty much all situations in all cases. If there is an unmet need that you're addressing and people like the solution, they'll want to work with you, collaborate with you, go for joint funding ventures and opportunities, support you to generate the data you need as a company in order to move forward. And realistically, their goal is to bring that technology into their practice. So I think in order to really engage with us, it's probably best to find someone in a role like my role, or talk to people who are involved in innovation as a whole and can see the vision, and actually try and find what problem in the system are you addressing. And if you don't know the answer to that when you're going into the conversation, it can sometimes result in a bit of a dead end. So that would be my advice from the public sector side.
Thanks, Chris. Very useful. I'm going to move on to the next question and to some of our other panel members on the next question, which is, how should larger organizations think of collaborating with startups and scale-ups, and how should they approach that process? So, Richard, do you have any insights to offer there?
Sure. I mean, I think to echo some of the points already made, startup collaboration is a great way of accelerating your corporate objectives outside of the red tape that comes with a big organization and sort of the legislation and everything around that. I think for that sort of partnership to work well, it's key that you as a corporate empower the startup, so you give them quite a clear scope, and a scope that's not too big, and you give them the reins to sort of do that without trying to influence too much what they need to do, or steer them into a way that's actually going to slow them down and maybe slow their growth. So I think empowerment is key. I also think the investment model is quite sort of critical in terms of how that's structured at the start. So does the startup need a silent partner that is there from an advisory perspective, or are we as a corp providing revenue into that startup? I think if it's a revenue model from a retailer's perspective, the best revenue models are those where they're proven and relatively risk-free. So it's a success-based revenue stream. So in our sector, in hospitality, if you can guarantee us a booking or an app download or an order, we will pay anyone for that, really. As long as it's easy to plug in. So that would probably be my perspective on it.
Thanks, Richard. And Jimmy, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's different depending on what organisation you're working with, but largely, I think the way we approach it is we try to think about what these organisations need. Scale-up startups are generally all looking for the same sort of help at different stages, whether it's funding, whether it's links to customers, whether it's to expand into other territories, or whether it's industry knowledge. So kind of what we try to do is work out what each of the startups we're working with needs, because we don't invest capital into startups directly as an organization. And then when we're running our accelerators, what we try to do is ensure that we're trying to service all of those needs. We can't meet all of them, so we tend to do that through an ecosystem as well, working with other people in the startup space, other venture people. And I think it's thinking about what they can bring to the party as well. So people have talked about moving faster and the innovation and those sorts of things. I think that's absolutely true. It brings that to a customer conversation. One of the other areas where we've seen quite a lot of success as well is making sure we're thinking about how these startups can be used and encouraged across the business. So what we found is that there are a lot of organizations that want to work with us and partner with us, and our sellers and our people mainly want access to our sellers, if I'm honest, and our customers, but there's a lot of demand on their time. So what we've done is we specifically set up a connector system, is where we onboard a startup that we are working with. We give them a connector with the organization who is there, not necessarily to mentor them, although normally there will be a bit of that as well, but it's more about being able to connect them to people in other countries, or being able to connect them to industry experts. And that's what we're finding is really valuable, is like a hour conversation with somebody that's been in a certain industry for 20 years can give them kind of a 6-month head start on things. So I think it's about being very deliberate with our actions to make sure that other people in our organization can help those startups.
Thanks, Jimmy. I'm going to go to James now, and I think, having been on both sides of the table, I'm very keen to sort of get his perspective on tips that we can give organizations around how startups and scale-ups can approach the process. So James, do you have any insights there?
Yeah, I think there's some good points, James, that have been raised already. I think the biggest challenges that I certainly experienced with working with larger organizations is sometimes the fallacy that maybe the larger organization has all the intel and all of the expertise. I think when startups are looking to engage with obviously these larger vendors, and then certainly in the the scenario I was in, it was all about enterprise software. It's about understanding, well, what really is the larger vendor trying to get out of this cooperation and this JV potentially, but also validating, is that actually the problem that you're trying to solve from the customer's perspective as well? Because sometimes I think larger organizations can take this heavy-handed approach and use their massive resources to I don't want to say bully, but certainly be a bit more overhanded, try and press their agenda. I think startups and scale-ups really need to look at those relationships for what it is, which is they are a larger organization. They've got great resources that they can and are usually willing to provide. But I think it's also about having clarity about what's that end goal and what we're trying to work with, and making sure that that goal is actually achieved, as it were. I always use these analogies with strategy about the summits of the mountains, and if you don't even know where the summit is, how do you know which route you can actually plan? I think sometimes there's lots of noise around the journey and the route, and sometimes again with that relationship, lots of unintended pivoting can take place, which again I think brings me on to things like process and engagement. Startups and scale-ups typically are very adept at applying agile practices and not being a complete purist, but the advantages you can get from that. And sometimes I think larger organizations may want to look at these types of engagements to learn themselves, well, this is how we should actually do it. And moving from the startup world to corporate world, I see there's still a lot of growth potential for larger organizations to adopt that better practice, as it were.
Thanks, James. That's very insightful. I'm going to open this up more broadly now, the question, so please let me know if you want to sort of jump in and give your view on it. But what are the challenges and opportunities created by startup and corporate engagement? And I suppose, how should we address them in order to ensure that they're successful? So does anybody want to jump in there and give a view on that?
So, yeah, I don't mind, James. I'll jump in again. I think certainly, again, from my own experience, in terms of the engagement and measuring success, I think as has been alluded to, I think there's different engagement models, whether there's debt or venture equity at stake as well. But typically, certainly my experience, it's been driven through revenue. And again, I think understanding the best way of seeking that revenue, and again, from the startup scale-ups perspective, I think keeping costs low and being lean means building the minimal viable products, and you can still generate revenue from those. And I think that's important to sometimes emphasize in those relationships with larger organizations, which seem to go for the gold-plated solution before they put their face in public, as it were. But I think if you can get the MVP and solve a part of the problem, you're on that journey of validation with the end user and the client. And at that point, it should just be a case of then evolving through iterations, those changes you want to make to the solution.
Thanks, James. I mean, personally, I've found from our perspective that some of the challenges are, particularly, I suppose, sort of at seed stages, the founder's not used to engaging with a large enterprise, and there's some hoops which are pretty onerous in relation to things like data or contracts, which they haven't been through previously, and you have to take them through that journey. And for me, if you can make that a more easy process, there's a benefit for the corporate, but there's also a big benefit and a good learning experience for the startup as well. I was keen to spend some time on the last question. I want to go to everybody specifically in relation to this, because I suppose what I'm keen to understand is what's the biggest success that you've had or biggest engagement you've had with a startup to date? What did it look like and why was it successful? So we can share that with the audience. So I'm going to go back to Gator again, but I'm going to go and ask everybody for their insight on this one.
Yeah, just one thing to add before moving to the success that I've already, I think, mentioned one of them. The thing that I found as challenging when businesses usually talk to each other is having clarity about why are we having that conversation? What do we need as an outcome? Why are we here? And one of the things I worked previously, and I supported startups like spin out from universities, and went and supported them through the journey of understanding the market, understanding their ideas. Sometimes startups, they have an idea and they want to target specific markets, and they sometimes focus on one market and ignoring other markets. So this is one of the challenges that actually facing them. They are so driven to solve one problem, but then their solution might be actually can be used with different type of markets, and they can get more revenue from it, but they just want to go and find out and talk to people. But when it comes to relationship between small companies and big companies, starting, it would be really good to have why are they there. Is that because they want to grow? Is that because they want to sell their company in a few years? Is that because they want their product to be the number one? It's like, what's their aim? Why are they there? Why are they trying to engage with bigger companies? I think having the clarity is very vital. That's from my point of view.
Thanks, Gata. So Chris, could you maybe talk to us a little bit about the biggest successes that you've had to date?
Yeah, sure. I think there's quite a few really. So it's hard to really pin them down. I think to go on a larger scale than on an individual basis, just to give an example as well, is actually, I think a lot of our success has come from being very, very open and connected to our community rather than having siloed working. And what this has allowed us to do is on an international scale is establish doorways, corridors of innovation and health tech, which has made it a lot easier for companies to kind of walk down that corridor and actually engage with the right part of the healthcare ecosystem with someone waiting for them on the other side. A lot of that has come from actual successful case studies. So it's a bit chicken and egg. And so we do have, particularly in the field of radiology, we actually have quite a few companies that we are working with and have worked with to revolutionize that sector by the utilization of AI and quality control platforms in order to completely change the way that radiological practice is done. So there's a couple of companies I could mention here. iMedis AI from Israel, or Chiron is quite famous in the UK now. We're working on breast cancer diagnostic screening, and they're developing really, really well. And the advantage of these pilots is they're almost the first of their kind in some ways in the UK. It's quite new, but the UK is arguably becoming a global competitor for the use of AI in diagnostics, and these are the case studies that work. And the reason they've been successful is because, again, they are addressing a need in the system, and it's easy. They're relatively easy, I should say, to convince people that this is something worth investing in, even though the public sector doesn't have a huge amount of money. They can justify it because there's a cost benefit in order to do that. So it has been really quite beneficial to do it. I guess another area of great success, which was pioneered in Leeds but is now very much a national program, is a program called the National Pathology Imaging Cooperative, or NPIC, which is worth people looking up. And this whole process has essentially created an entire workflow of digitization of pathological services. And it's been so successful working with a range of companies that have been able to tap into this, and they still have open doors to engage with innovators. It's because of the innovation and working with startups and scale-ups, as well as large corporates at the same time, that they've been able to succeed and to basically turn our entire pathological slide processes digital, and then convince people at government level to invest tens of millions of pounds to make this a national program to change the entire NHS ecosystem. So I think those are really good examples of success that I can put on the table, and it really just comes from quite an informal initial discussion that leads to a very collaborative partnership.
Thanks, Chris. That's really insightful, and I think in looking at some of the comments here in relation to the broader public sector, it feels like people can see the NHS is maybe ahead of the game, and we need to apply some of those principles in other areas as well. So that's really, really useful insight. If I move on to Richard now, from your sort of perspective, what's the biggest engagement and success you've had to date?
Well, I suppose just to sort of touch on your last two questions, I think with success, first of all, it's important to consider at the start of a relationship with a startup what that success will look like and what your corporate exit plan will be. And I think that often gets overlooked because actually it's very easy to exit out of an unsuccessful startup venture. A very successful one that then becomes, critical to your operation. If you haven't planned for that, that can be quite a difficult conversation, right? How do you scale it? So, where do you sort of take that there afterwards? So I think that's really important in those initial discussions, just to sort of map out at a high level what that might look like, as well as being excited about the short-term opportunity. To sort of layer that onto a really successful venture we've had in the last 18 months. Anyone who's close to the hospitality market will know that the boom of delivery has been unprecedented, strengthened by, I suppose, the requirement during the pandemic to provide most to people who couldn't leave the house for whatever reason. We invested in the startups a couple of years ago to integrate various delivery aggregators, fulfillment partners into our systems for us, and sort of put some intelligence around that. Very sort of, dipping our toes in the water opportunity back then now has become critical to our business. That startup has then gone on to sort of scale to almost a global integration position. So I think having a bit of faith and having some trends sort of accelerate within the market can make a really good retail opportunity.
Just on that, Richard, why not build that yourself? Why go with a third party?
I think it goes back to our earlier points around what a startup can accelerate at a faster pace than your core business, right? And for us, we would have had to look at a lot of red tape around that. Would we have managed to do it as quickly? Would we have sort of been tied down with various enterprise level security discussions, which actually, if you bolt it onto your infrastructure as a branch rather than the trunk, you can get to market faster. And in a retail environment, time, speed to market is everything. What are we doing now as part of an exit plan in that arena? Well, we're bringing it into our core, right? And I think that is very much the strategy, right? You start as a branch, and at the right point, you bring it into your trunk of your business.
All right, Richard, very, very useful. Thank you. Jimmy?
Yeah, I think there's probably three different types of example, and I'll try not to eat up all the time with all three. But there's ones where, a bit similar to Richard's story, where there are organizations that have filled a gap that Microsoft has. So our developers are busy developing our core product. So if we think, the one that always springs out to me is SwiftKey, which was spun out of the University of Cambridge ages ago. And now every time you type anything in any Microsoft product or any Microsoft device, it's using SwiftKey. And we brought that a long time ago. We started working with them to solve a specific customer challenge, but they sort of became core to us. And if you look at the acquisitions Microsoft's made, which we don't make many, they're all filling a gap in the market that we don't have. So that's kind of one way where we've seen some good successes with startups. Other areas are more in the scale-up space. So if I think of companies like Rubrik, where they built their own company on our technology, what we then did is help them scale. And we do that through things like our marketplace and our co-sell initiatives, where we essentially, once we onboard them as a partner, they then get access to every single market we operate in and every single customer. And for the right technology platforms, that gives you sort of a global sales force almost instantly. So we've had some great successes there as well. Personally, my most recent ones have been with the cohorts that we've run, the accelerator startups that we've won, where kind of about at least 10 to 15% of them are coming out with funding. Another 10% are coming out with contracts into other customers that we've gained together. And I think it's us being able to kind of go hand in hand with them. And I think some of the problems that startups face is the perceived risk of doing business with them because of their size or their early stage. So showing up hand in hand, we have some good successes, securing some good contracts for some of our startup organizations.
All right, thank you, Jimmy, and finally over to you, James.
Yeah, I think my point of view, James, would be more from, I think, the startup scale-up kind of side of things. And the success that I would point towards in terms of experience was really about the engagement and sometimes being aware of what the exit and what success looks like. And for the time that I worked with our large organization, which was at the time the largest enterprise software company in the world, it started off really as a professional services type role that we did, where we specialized in one of those products. And I say this purely from a perspective of how do startups get that engagement through to success. And sometimes it's about, or certainly using the professional services approach that helps us identify gaps in the technology. It got us customer facing, which allowed us to get feedback direct from clients and find out, well, what are the real issues of the day? And what that then led us to do is use that intel and research to actually develop out the products that fits and solved those problems. What that led us to do was OEM and white label our solution with the larger organization, which generated significant royalties. And I think any advice to startups and scale-ups is don't always assume that the large organization with whom you work is going to be the exit. What we actually did in our exit at the time was actually from a company that also operated in the ecosystem of that larger organization as well. So that exit for us at the time was actually with a company very similar to us, not the larger organization, whilst ultimately they benefited from that acquisition as well. So always keep, I think, your mind open on the nature of the engagement and other opportunities that might be aligned with where you are, not just directly associated with the larger organization.
Thank you, James. I'm just conscious of time, and we do have a question from Stephen here, which I think you'll probably appreciate any insight that we can provide, which is there's a lot of horror stories from startups who have experienced death by pilot. How can startups show their value and help to guarantee, I suppose there's no such thing as a guarantee, but improve the probability in this context of a deal at the end of a pilot? So would anybody like to share their thoughts on this? Chris?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I mean, from my perspective on this, the value of death or death by pilot, as different ways of describing it, is a really, really valid point. And a lot of that comes down to you making sure that you do that pilot with the organization that's going to take things forward properly with you, and that will probably act as a demonstrator site of success. Because what you'll find with the NHS, for example, where it doesn't do so well is everybody wants to do an evaluation, everyone wants to do a pilot and do their own thing, and it doesn't talk to itself. So really you want to kind of focus on a handful of key and vital partnerships, and then work with other authorities like the academic health science networks or some government organizations in parallel, so that when you have a message at the end of your pilot, it's ready to go and it's in a relatively neat package. I'm making it sound a lot easier than it is in practice. But the truth is that really helps. And that's something that we're trying to do differently, is say, okay, if there's a business case for us to use this and we like what we see at the end of the pilot, we want to take it all the way through the pipeline. And you need to work with people who have that vision and make that clear when you sign up to that pilot and you contract something, that is the outcome. You'll never be guaranteed a deal at the end of a pilot in the NHS. We cannot guarantee procurement of any solution. It would actually be illegal for us to do so in many ways, because we need to be a fair tender organization. But we can develop a business case for why we would want to procure your solution compared to others if the data shows that it's valid enough. So that would be my advice, is it's kind of down to the company to make sure that they do their shopping first and find the right organizations and partnerships, and that pilot agreement really is the right one. A lot of startups are very keen to just get things going, and I get that. And maybe in the first instance you can do that, but then very soon afterwards you need to knuckle down and work with the sites that can deliver what I've just stated.
Thanks, Chris. That's really, I think it's a really good insight that you shared there. Anybody like to add anything from maybe a private sector lens here in terms of the perspective?
Quite happy to jump in. I think Chris is very right that you've got to be mindful of the public sector procurement rules, which you can't work around. They're there, they're in place, and they can't be worked around. But I think we also need to be careful with the terms, I think. So there were a lot of people in my very early sales days, we would always be really keen to do proof of concepts with customers, because we hoped that when we got it in with the customer, then they'd never get rid of it. It would be too important for them to get rid of. The challenge is with a proof of concept, I think, what are you trying to prove? Everybody needs to agree what you're trying to prove, and you need to understand what the exit out of that stage is and into the next stage. In public sector, quite often that leads to a pilot, because you do need to prove the case before you can move to a procurement. In private sector, to me, pilots shouldn't really exist. They should just be the first stage with a gateway of your contract. So I think you need to be careful around the language and what you're going to get out of each stage and what the agreed transition is to the next stage. And let's just get everybody up front on what that is, because there's no nasty surprises at the end.
Thanks, Jimmy. Anybody else got anything to add to Jimmy's points there? Okay, guys, so I think we're on time. I think our cutoff was 10 past 12 before we go back to the main room. So we got 60 seconds left if anybody else has any specific questions to ask in the Q&A. So if you have, please do that now. Otherwise, we'll sort of finish up the session and we'll go back to the main room and we can see who's ultimately won the overall competition. So very exciting. Okay, guys. All right. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.